Hey, how's it? In today's video, we're going to be discussing Zulus. And even though we're not going to speak about Shaka Zulu, we're going to speak about something that's equally as impressive. The Arken or DNT Optics Zulu. Now, before we get into the detail of this awesome scope, I just want to use the opportunity to thank Ian at SA Air Rifles and Anton at Engage Optics for allowing me the opportunity to play with the scope over the last 2 or 3 weeks. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Engage Optics is the South African distributor for both Arken and DNT Optics brands. Now, you'll actually hear me speak about Arken and DNT as if it's the same company. And, tactically it is. What Arken has done is that they've rebranded their digital range under the new brand DNT Optics, which stands for Day and Night Technologies. So you'll actually see all of the new night and digital scope ranges that come out will be rebranded under DNT Optics. You'll also see the app that we're going to use to configure parts of the scope and update firmware and calculate our ballistics. That's all under the new DNT brand. So what did we get in the box? Well, the box itself is actually quite elegant, very classic, very classy. In the box, we've got this awesome unit, and we're going to go through the details of that in just a second. I also got this eyepiece, and you can screw this to the back of the scope, and I think the objective of this is to look through the eyepiece, and it gives you a better field of view. I personally used it once or twice and decided to use the scope without that. I've actually got a better field of view without that than adding it onto the scope. We also got a very beautiful, classy white cloth that we can use to clean the lenses, especially this time of the year. It's dust everywhere when you go hunting, and you need to keep your lenses clean. The problem is, though, that it is beautifully white, which I don't think is the best color for cleaning your lenses because it turns brown pretty quickly, but it's a beautiful cloth irrespective. And then lastly, we've got our manual. Now, you know as well as I do that real men don't read manuals, so we can take this and just chuck it to the side there. We're strong enough to figure out the scope by ourselves. Okay, so let's go through the different components of the scope. I'm going to start in the front and we'll work towards the back. You should also see the display on the screen at the moment. So in the front, we've got our recording button. Essentially, when we go into the menu structure of the scope itself, we're going to use 4 predominant buttons. First one is the recording button. The left one is the switch between day and night. It also controls my infrared. The one on the right is to set the brightness in daytime mode, and the one at the back is my settings or my menu options that I can go into. And we're going to predominantly use those 4 buttons to navigate the menu structure of this scope. Behind the menu or the settings button, we've got the power button, and behind that, we've got our zoom button. So that allows us to zoom in and out, and you'll see that functionality quite actively through the demonstration today. On the left-hand side here, we've got our rangefinder, and at the back of the rangefinder, we've got our button, and we're going to use that for some funky stuff during the video as well. I've learned such awesome things, and just underneath that, we've then got our infrared. So let's get into the scope. I would like to make a recommendation and say that even though you can configure all the different aspects of this digital scope through the menu structure, I would recommend that that people start by downloading the DNT Optics app. Now, you can download that app from your local app store, or alternatively, you can go to the DNT Optics website and you can download the application from there. The reason why I mention that is when you get the scope initially, the app will check if your scope has got the latest firmware. If it doesn't, it will give you the opportunity to update the firmware on the scope. So why is that important? Firmware updates, fixes little glitches or fixes or increases the capabilities of certain areas or updates the functionality of the scope in various ways. So for me personally, I think it's a good thing to just update the firmware. And after that, you can decide whether you want to use the menu structure on the scope or whether you want to use the digital app on your mobile phone. Okay, so let's go through the menu structure on your DNT Optics Zulu. The first thing is I'm going to hold that power button probably for about 2 or 3 seconds until I see the DNT Optics logo appear, and I'm going to open up the front cap. Now, in configuring this scope initially, you've got 2 focal points. At the back, that focal point acts very similar as your ocular adjustment on a normal scope. So this allows me to get my crosshairs nice and crisp. And in the front, that acts like more of a parallax feature. So as I increase in distance, which you'll see in a few minutes when we start shooting our targets, I need to make adjustments very similar to making adjustments with your parallax. So let's go into the menu structure. I'm going to do that by holding in the settings or the menu button. Just a quick note. If you don't hold in that button, you just happen to tap it, it will change the color of your crosshairs. Now you'll see in just a bit, there's different crosshairs that we can select and different colors that we can select. I've chosen for the demonstration purposes yellow as my crosshair color scheme, but you can ultimately change it to black, to white, to whatever the case may be. Now let's say that it's currently black, that's your color, and you just tap that, it will go to the next color, let's say for example white, and then you have to keep on tapping it until you get back to your color. So just remember, don't tap it. If you're going to go into the menu structure, rather hold it down. So let's talk about the menu structure for a second. When I go into the menu, you'll see that I've got my ballistics options, I've got my aiming method. So let's just speak about the aiming method for a second. Because of the ballistics capability of the scope, when I change distance, so say for example I zero at 25 meters and now I'm going to shoot at 50 meters, the scope automatically calculates my holdover. But when I go and make these changes, I can decide whether I want to use holdover as the method or whether I just want the crosshairs to move to the spot that I need to aim. Both of those are options. I can either use a holdover, which the scope will indicate, or alternatively, it will just go and put my crosshairs exactly where I need to go and shoot. So that's what we see under aiming method. Then I'm not going to speak about the rest. What's important there is Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Now, the application has got 2 aspects associated to it, and we're going to look at that in a bit more detail just now. But to do the configuration and to use the recording function and the scope zeroing function, I need to connect to the Wi-Fi settings of the digital scope. So that's one aspect. In order to update the ballistics tables into the device, I need to connect via Bluetooth. So on the menu, you'll see that I've got Wi-Fi, and just next to it, I've got Bluetooth. Now, how selection works is as follows. When I get to the specific menu item that I want to get into, so for example, I'm going to use left and right, I'm going to move across the menu structure. When there's a menu item, so say for example, I want to go and activate Bluetooth, I will select the record button, and that will then give me a sub-menu structure, where I can again use either the left button or the right button to make a selection. And on the back of that, I'll just press the record button again, and that will then lock in that specific choice. So underneath, I've got Wi-Fi, I've got Bluetooth. I'm going to show you zeroing on my mobile phone because I think it's the freakiest thing I've ever seen. So I'm not going to speak about that. Let's just speak about the gyroscope. So the gyroscope ensures that I am not canting my rifle to one end or the other. Now, at 50 meters, canting your rifle doesn't really have a big effect. But if I'm shooting at 100 or 150 or 200 meters, canting has a massive effect. So that gyro setting, I can actually see in the display as I cant my rifle. So I quite enjoy that. I'm not going to switch that off. And then the next button is power switch off. I highly recommend that you go and set that. Even if you set it to 30 minutes, go and enable that function. By default, that function is not enabled. And unfortunately, I've run out of battery power quite a few times. It lasts a long time. But I mean, I would get back to the device sort of the next day in the afternoon, having left the scope running only to find the battery flat. So, you know, just go and put that on 30 minutes. If you forget, then at least you can just hit that power button and it will be all the way back on. The last thing you want to do is get ready the next morning at 5 o'clock to go and look for that price guru, and your scope doesn't work. So yes, definitely go and configure one of those settings. So with that, I'm then going to go into the mobile application and I'm going to show you some of the capabilities there. So as mentioned, to control my digital scope through my mobile device, I need to go and enable the Wi-Fi capability on the scope. Two ways of doing that. I can either go and hold in settings, use the menu structure, go to Wi-Fi, switch it on, or alternatively, I can just hold in the brightness button. So I'm going to hold that in for a few seconds, and there it is now initiated my Wi-Fi mode. So in order to get into the app, you'll see that when I select that, it's going to try and connect to Wi-Fi on my scope. Or on my phone, it will actually go into my Wi-Fi settings for me to go and update. And I'm just going to select my scope. So once that is connected, I'm going to go back into the application itself, and you'll see now that my Zulus is connected. So when I go and select that, you'll see on the top, I've got all the different options that we've just spoken about. So on the far right-hand side, you'll see that that's my settings button, and all the settings we've just spoken about on the menu structure that comes with the scope, I've got available on my mobile device as well. So I'm going to go one back. If I look at the rest of the settings there, you'll see that I've got my brightness control. So let's just give it a second to update. I've got brightness. I'm currently on level 3. I don't need anything more than that. I've got the ability to switch between daytime and night mode. I've then got the ability to zoom in or out. So I can zoom out quite a bit, and I can also zoom back in. So those are some of the functions that you'll see next to my day and night mode. And then we get into my favorite function. So this is our reticle display. This also allows us to go and zero our scope. So the first thing we'll look at here is just the reticle itself. And here you'll see that I've got a variety of options, from very complex reticles to simplified reticles, or even just a red dot or a yellow dot. So I've got quite a few options that I'm going to go through here. Next to that, you'll also see that I can adjust my X and Y axis. This is very similar to watching a scope tracking. So when you do a single shot zero, a one shot zero, you can go and track towards where the bullet hit and ultimately adjust the scope accordingly. But one of my favorite features is the thing that I'm going to show you in just a second. And in order to do that, I'm just going to take the first shot on target so that we can understand where I'm shooting more or less at this point in time. So let me get myself on target there. And I landed just right off the target. You can see that if I zoom in on the screen. So let me just turn the camera around so that I can show you what that looks like. We're just going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, so you can now see where that bullet hit. So let me go back into my reticle area, and I'm going to get the scope bang on target. So let's just move it a little bit here. Okay, so that's on target. Once it's on target, I'm just going to hit the power button just quickly. So when I select that power button, you'll actually notice on the mobile app that it's turned the middle of my reticle red. And in order to zero my rifle, all I have to do is just move my reticle to wherever the hole is and select OK. Now let's go and take our follow-up shot. And in order to do that, I'm going to hit the record button so that you can see on the video what we've done. And obviously it's a bullseye. Now, I don't know what kind of black magic voodoo fuckery that is, but it's here to stay, and I love that. It's one of my favorite features of the digital scope itself. It's so easy to ultimately go and zero. So those are some of the main functions that we typically work with in a day mode. The next area that we're going to look at is both the ballistics application as well as the night mode. I'm sitting here, it's pitch black around me, so I'll go and switch off the lights in just a second so that we can work in the darkness. But in essence, we're going to look at those two functions. So let's go and have a look at the ballistics part of the application. As I mentioned before, you need to enable Bluetooth in order to update the ballistics. And while we're on the ballistics app, I think there's two things that I really want to mention. Before the DNT Optics application, which caters for both of these aspects, both the settings part, the recording part, and the ballistics part, there was a predecessor to that functionality, which was the Arken ballistics application. Now, when I go into the settings of that application, you'll see that I've got something called unit settings, which allowed me to predefine the units that I want to use. So I can say, well, you know, we are going to use metric as a system, but I still want to measure velocity in feet per second. Distance has to be in meters, you know, depending on weather, I want to measure that in Celsius, but I want the ability to go and select those features. Unfortunately, in the DNT app, that's not the case. So every time I go and add a new rifle, because I can select multiple rifles or add multiple rifles, I need to define those units from scratch. Now, I'm sure that that's just something that will be updated very, very shortly. I don't think it's a failure in the app, but it is very convenient if I've got that functionality. The next part that I do need to mention is you'll see if I look at the weather, because obviously weather impacts the velocity, I've got wind that I need to deal with, I've got humidity that I need to deal with. So I need to go and update that information. And there's applications like Chair Gun, for example, where I can select to get the weather from the internet. I can get it for my current location. It fetches that data from the internet. It's already gone and updated that. And when I say update the information, it's already been done. So once again, I think that's just a couple of weeks away before we get that functionality, but it's definitely something that I would like within the application itself. But with the moaning out of the way, let's go and have a look at the functionality. The first thing that I'm going to do is to go and add all of my additional rifles. So you'll see that I've got a default setting. I can select that and I can do things like change default. So I'm going to call this my RTI Priest that I'm going to be shooting with, and let's just go and save that detail. So this is going to ask me questions around what caliber am I shooting, what is the weight, what is the length, what is the velocity. Now, I don't have to go and use Copilot or Google to go and find those answers. Fortunately, you'll see that I can go and select either my bullet or I can select factory ammo. So when I select factory ammo, you'll see that I've got all the different cartridges and I can select all of the different options. For example, 6.5 Creedmoor and the rest. I can also go and specify the brand of cartridge that I'm going to use. Now, obviously, I am shooting pellets with my air rifle, so I'm just going to go and select pellets. I'm going to go into caliber, and this happens to be a .22. And the brand that I'm shooting is called Javelins. So I'm just going to go and scroll down until we get the Patriot Javelins. I'm going to go and select those. And then it goes and filters the view for me. So I'm shooting Javelin slugs Gen 2, the 22 or 23 grain. So that's what you see here. I'll go and add my ammunition, and you'll see that it's gone and pre-calculated all of those fields for me. Now, the nice thing about this is I don't just have to use this capability with the digital scope. I can use any of my Arken scopes and use the same functionality in order to determine things like holdover and pellet drop, etc. Now, on top there, it's going to ask me what distance that I go and zero. And as you just saw a second ago, we used 25 meters. It's going to ask me what my scope height is. So obviously, in order to calculate that, I'll attach a little video here. But in essence, it's the radius of your barrel plus the radius of your scope plus the distance between the barrel and the scope. So that will give you a scope height. I'm just going to leave it where it is at the moment. And the twist rate for this specific barrel is 1 to 17.7. Now that you can go and Copilot or use Google for if you don't know those details out of your head. So I've gone and added all of that information. I can now go and say save, and I've got the related information available for me here. Now, in order to get this data into, you know what I should do? I missed something big. I need to update the velocity there. So I am shooting those 23 grain slugs at about 850 feet per second. So that's quite important to go and add. And you'll see now my distance at 25 meters means that my scope is level. If I go and change that distance, so say for example, I'm going to shoot at 100 meters, and I just go and add that, you'll see that it's going to give me, whether it's an MRAD or an MOA scope, it's going to give me the amount of clicks that I need to move up in this case, and the amount of clicks that I need to move left and right. I'm not going to shoot at 100 meters. We're literally just going to go and shoot at 40 meters. So you'll see that there's small little adjustments that need to be made. But I'm not going to make those adjustments because obviously I've got the ability to take this information and upload that into my digital scope. So it takes a few seconds. And voila, the ballistics data has been transferred. So what we're going to do is move our target to the back there. I've got a target set up at 40 meters, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Let me hit record. So I've moved up to the target there at 40 meters. And I am going to hit the rangefinder button so that we can see where we're at. You'll see on the screen we're currently at about 41 meters as I'm sitting here. Now, in order to get my holdover details, or alternatively, depending on whether I selected holdover or whether I selected to change my positioning, all I have to do is hit that rangefinder button again just once, just quickly, and you'll see that it will give me my holdover point. So I'm going to have this just on the white for a second and hit that quickly. And can you see on the screen, I've now got my holdover point. It's in red. So what I'm going to do is let's just go and load my rifle. I'm going to get that smack bang on target. I pulled that one, but it's close enough. It's close enough. If that was a buck, it would have been gone. So as you can see there, very, very easily acquiring my target as a result of the holdover functionality that I've just mentioned. Again, for me, this is mind-blowing. I can't see any hunter not using this capability, especially, you know, if I think about the fact that if you quest a buck, I don't know what the English word for that is, it becomes fairly expensive. If the tracker goes and just sees a drop of blood, you pay for that buck whether you can find it or not. So with this, at least you're giving yourself a chance, depending on the distance, which you can very quickly acquire and have the ability to leverage the holdover points. So again, this is awesome functionality available to us. So what we're going to do next is we're going to switch into the night mode functionality. And in order to do that, I just need to go and make it dark. So I'll see you in a second. Okay, so it is pitch black out there. I can't see anything beyond 7 meters, and these lights don't make that easy for me at all. So let me hit record on the scope. And you'll see that we're currently sitting at 42 meters, and you could roughly see the outline of that target we shot a few minutes ago. I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but it's a rough layout of that target. So what I'm going to do is we're going to switch into night mode, and that's the left button. So if I just go and hold that in, it is going to stop recording, so I'm just going to hit record again. And let's go and switch on infrared. So I'm going to select that button once, and you'll see, just like that, infrared is engaged. Now, I've got a couple of options here. I've got about 6 settings, so I can change that and make that a little bit brighter. I also have the ability to zoom in there, so we're going to use our parallax functionality to really get on target there at the back, and we can make several changes. One of the things that we've got access to there is also to use the automatic function. So let the scope determine which the best setting is for us to use. But as you can see there, our target is now in perfect illumination. So I'm going to take a few more shots there. Why not? That's what it's all about. So let's just get center. There we go. Oh man, shooting will never not be fun. And as you can see there, all of those shots are bullseyes. I've obviously been using the holdover. I can still see that very, very clearly. And as you can see, that target is so bright. It's easy to acquire, very easy to see. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to take a run to the front. Let me be honest. I'm going to take a slow walk to the front, and let's see if we can acquire my silhouette at the back there. Now, in order to do that, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. So you should see that on screen at the moment as well. So that is really the field of view that we've got. So let's go and do that for a second. I'm going to walk out there and let's see if we can make some changes. Okay, it's 45 minutes later and I've got my breath back. It's not been that long, but I should have sat down for 45 minutes. So what are my final thoughts on this awesome scope? Well, firstly, by now you would have realized that it's awesome. But I also have to come clean. This is the first digital scope I've ever not just reviewed, but played and worked with. And at the time of this recording, this digital scope goes for about 17,000 Rand. So unfortunately, I can't tell you how this compares to a 50,000 or 100,000 Rand day-night scope. I don't have that reference point. What I do have is the fact that for my introduction into day-night scopes, I've thoroughly enjoyed every single aspect of this scope. And yeah, I don't think Anton's ever going to see this scope again. So just as a finale, I've got a little target there at the back. So let's just see if we can acquire that target. Let's just go and load. I'm going to hit record. And let's see if we can use our holdover to hit it. This is amazing. I'll see you guys on the next one.